Catherine Whitfield was 33 years old when her husband of 10 years texted her 4 words that would end their marriage. "I'm stuck at work." She was standing 2 tables away when he sent it. Reginald hadn't noticed her yet, too busy laughing with a woman half her age at a wine bar he'd chosen specifically because it wasn't the restaurant where he'd proposed. He thought he was careful. He thought Catherine was home, waiting, believing him. He had no idea she'd walked this block by accident, planning a surprise of her own. Catherine watched him check his phone, watched him hit send, watched the lie land exactly the way he intended it to. She didn't storm over. She didn't call his name. She lifted her own phone and photographed the table, the woman's hand on his arm, the receipt he thought no one would ever see. Reginald had spent months believing his wife was too soft, too trusting, too busy shrinking herself to ever notice what he'd built behind her back. He was wrong. And he wouldn't find out how wrong until it was already too late. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today, and if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The fraud was hiding in plain sight. It always was. Catherine Whitfield found it at 6:14 in the morning, before the coffee finished brewing, before the overhead lights in the compliance department had fully warmed up. She was alone at her desk, the rest of the floor dark and quiet, just the low hum of the building's ventilation and the pale blue glow of her monitor filling the space around her. The file had been flagged 3 weeks ago. A mid-sized construction account, irregular transfers, nothing dramatic enough to trip the automated system. Her team had looked at it twice and moved on. Too scattered, they said. No clear pattern. Catherine looked at it once. She pulled up the transaction history and laid the dates side by side in a separate tab. Then she cross-referenced the payee codes against the account's stated operating expenses. Her eyes moved slowly, steadily, the way they always did when something was wrong but not yet visible. There, and there, and there. Every transfer landed on the 11th or the 26th, not the 10th or the 25th, which would have suggested a billing cycle. The 11th and the 26th. One day after the standard reconciliation window closed. Whoever set this up knew exactly how the system breathed. She made a note. Then she made another. By the time the first of her colleagues arrived at 8:30, Catherine had built a clean, documented trail covering 19 months of activity, a summary memo, and a recommendation for external referral. Her colleague Marcus dropped his bag on his chair and looked over her shoulder. He read the first page. Then he looked at her. "How long did this take you?" "Since 6, she said. He shook his head slowly. "We had 3 people on this." Catherine just saved the file and reached for her coffee. She didn't say what she was thinking. She rarely did, at work or anywhere else. It was a habit she had built carefully over years, the habit of taking up less space than she actually occupied, of offering the result without advertising the effort, of being useful without being threatening. It had made her very good at her job. It had also kept her 2 rungs below where she should have been on the org chart, until last week, when the regional director had called her in and offered her the senior compliance lead position. A real title, a real salary, the kind of role she had stopped letting herself want out loud. She hadn't told Reginald yet. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, but that was only partly true. The fuller truth was that she already knew how the conversation would land. He would smile, say the right words, and then go quiet in that particular way he had. A silence that wasn't proud, that pressed against her like a hand on the shoulder pushing down. Reginald didn't like competing. That was how she had always framed it in her mind. Gently, as though it were just a personality quirk and not something she had spent a decade managing around. So she kept it to herself, the same way she kept other things. She kept the box of hair dye under the bathroom sink, the shade she'd been using for the past 2 years to cover the gray that had started coming in at her temples. Reginald had never mentioned it, which probably meant he hadn't noticed, but she didn't want to find out. She kept the anniversary dress in a dry cleaning bag in the back of the closet and had been skipping lunch since Monday to make sure it still fit the way it had when she bought it. Not because the dress was tight, because she wanted it to look a certain way. And wanting that felt easier than questioning why she still worked so hard to disappear inside his idea of her. Chapel and Vine had been their place since the night he proposed. High ceilings, candlelight, a wine list that felt serious without being pretentious. They went there for every anniversary, every milestone worth marking. Tonight was 10 years. Reginald had brought it up himself over breakfast, which surprised her. Lately, he'd been elsewhere, even when he was in the room. Vague answers, short sentences, his phone always face down on the table. Money was tight, he said, but vaguely, the way he said most things about his development projects lately. Nothing specific, nothing she could hold. But that morning, he had looked up from his phone and confirmed the reservation himself. 7:30, Chapel and Vine, same as always. "You'll come straight from work?" he asked. "I was going to," Catherine said. "Is that okay?" "Perfect." He said it quickly. Then he smiled, and it was a normal smile, and she told herself she was reading into things. "That's perfect." She let it go. She was good at letting things go. She left the office at 4:30, earlier than she had in months. The case file was submitted. Her inbox could wait until morning. She had 10 years to celebrate, and a dress hanging in the back of her closet, and for a few hours she wanted to just be a woman looking forward to a nice dinner. She tucked her bag under her arm and walked toward the elevator, already thinking about how the candlelight would look. The restaurant district smelled like garlic and warm bread. Catherine walked slowly, her heels quiet against the pavement, the late afternoon light turning everything gold. The streets weren't crowded yet, that in-between hour, just past 5, when the lunch crowd had gone and the dinner crowd hadn't arrived. A few restaurant staff stood outside propping doors open. A delivery truck idled at the corner. The city was exhaling. She had thought of it on the train. Ferrante's. She'd heard 2 of her colleagues talking about it last month. Smaller than Chapel and Vine, quieter, candles in old wine bottles and handmade pasta, and a courtyard in the back with string lights. More intimate, they said. More personal. She'd thought about suggesting it to Reginald, but hadn't, the same way she didn't suggest most things anymore. But tonight was 10 years. Tonight felt like the right time to do something different. She had called ahead from the platform. They had a table. 8 o'clock if she wanted it. She did. Ferrante's was 2 blocks west of Chapel and Vine, tucked just off the main strip. She wanted to walk past it, see the front, make sure it felt right before she committed. It was the kind of thing she did. Checking, confirming, making sure the details were correct before she let herself settle into a thing. She turned off the main street onto a narrower block, the buildings older here, the brick darker. Small awnings, a florist pulling in buckets from the sidewalk, a bookshop with the lights still on inside, and then a wine bar she had never noticed before. It sat between a tailor and an empty storefront, nothing remarkable about it from the outside. A small sign above the door. Warm amber light spilling through the front window, the kind of place that didn't need to advertise because the people who found it already knew it. Catherine barely glanced at it as she passed, and then she stopped. It happened the way those moments always happen, not with a crash, not with music, just a small, quiet wrongness that moved through her like cold water. She turned back to the window. Reginald was sitting at a table near the far wall. He was leaning forward, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbows the way he only ever did when he was completely relaxed. His tie was loosened. There was a bottle of wine on the table, mostly gone. He was laughing, really laughing, his head tilted back slightly, his whole face open in a way she hadn't seen in... She tried to remember. She couldn't. The woman across from him was younger. Dark hair, cut short and sharp at the jaw. A silk blouse, deep green. She had her elbow on the table and her chin resting in her hand, watching him the way you watch someone when you are not just listening to what they're saying, but studying them, collecting them. Catherine stood still on the sidewalk. The window was old glass, slightly wavy, the kind that distorts things at the edges. But the center was clear. Clear enough. She could see his hand resting near the woman's on the table. Not touching, not quite. Just close. The way you put your hand when touching isn't necessary because everything else is already saying it. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. "I'm stuck at work, so sorry. Going to be at least another hour. I'll make it up to you tonight, I promise." She read it twice. She looked back through the window. He was still laughing. He hadn't reached for his phone. He had sent that message without excusing himself, without pausing, without so much as glancing away from the woman across from him. It had taken him 4 seconds. A reflex, automatic, like breathing. Catherine felt very cold and very still. The street around her continued on without her. The florist locked his door. A couple walked by close enough to brush her arm. She didn't move. She had stood at her desk that morning and found 19 months of fraud in 2 hours. She had seen the shape of a lie in a column of numbers before anyone else in the building thought to look. She was very good at recognizing patterns. She understood what she was looking at. She stepped back from the window. 1 step, then 2, until she was standing against the building across the narrow street, half in shadow, no longer visible from inside. She opened her camera. Her hand was steady. She noticed that, distantly, how steady her hand was. She framed the shot through the glass, his face, the woman's profile, the wine bottle, the easy lean of 2 people with nothing to hide from each other, and she pressed the shutter once, twice. Then she opened her contacts and called Chapel & Vine. "Thank you for calling Chapel & Vine. How can I help you?" "I have a reservation for tonight," Catherine said. Her voice was even, professional, the voice she used in conference rooms. 7:30, under Whitfield. I need to cancel." "Of course. Is there anything?" "No," she said. "Thank you." She ended the call. She stood with her back against the brick and her phone in her hand. The amber light from the wine bar reached just to the edge of the curb. She did not look through the window again. She already had what she needed. The cab home cost $32. Catherine sat in the back with her hands folded in her lap and watched the city pass the window. The gold had gone out of the light now. The streets were gray-blue in that particular way they get at early evening, when the day has decided it's finished, but the night hasn't quite started yet. She did not cry. She thought about that, almost clinically, the way she thought about most things. She was waiting for the tears to arrive, the way you wait for pain after an injury, tensed for it. But they didn't come. What came instead was something quieter and much colder. A kind of clarity, like the moment before she flagged a discrepancy in an audit, when everything around the number goes soft and the number itself goes sharp. She paid the driver and went inside. The house was exactly as she had left it that morning. Her coffee cup, rinsed and upturned in the rack, his breakfast plate in the sink, not rinsed, the way it always was. The anniversary dress was still laid out on the bed upstairs, the deep burgundy one she had bought 3 weeks ago and had been rationing her lunches to fit into. She walked past it without looking at it, changed into a gray sweater and jeans, and folded the dress carefully over the back of the chair. Then she went downstairs and made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly, both hands around the mug, watching the back garden go dark through the glass door. The neighbor's cat moved along the top of the fence. A light came on in the house behind theirs. Normal things. The world continuing as if nothing had shifted on its axis 2 hours ago on a narrow street she had never walked down before. She stayed there for a long time. She heard his key in the door at 9:47. She knew, because she had been watching the clock on the microwave without meaning to, the way you track a storm on radar. She took one slow breath, set down the book she hadn't been reading, and arranged her face. Reginald came in, carrying a small bunch of flowers, grocery store flowers, the kind in the clear plastic sleeve with the rubber band still on, pink carnations and white baby's breath, already slightly soft at the edges, purchased from somewhere still open at this hour. "Hey," he said, stepping into the kitchen. He looked tired, or was performing tired, and Catherine found she could no longer tell the difference. "I am so sorry about tonight." "It's okay," she said. "It's not." He set the flowers on the counter and came over to where she was sitting, bent down, and kissed the top of her head. His aftershave was faint now, worn down to something warm and woody. She knew that smell better than almost anything in the world. "Client emergency. Hargrove's people. Total disaster. I had to be there. I figured, she said. He looked at her. A small assessment, quick and almost invisible. She had seen it before without knowing what it was. Now she knew exactly what it was. You're not upset? He asked. I'm disappointed, she said, but I understand. She stood and moved to the cabinet for a vase. I wasn't really up for a big dinner anyway. Long day. I'm glad to just be home. She watched him relax, watched the tension move out of his shoulders like air from a tire. That was the thing about men like Reginald. They trusted the response they expected. They didn't look past it. I'll make it up to you, he said. Properly. This weekend, wherever you want. Sure, she said. She filled the vase and put the carnations in it. They looked exactly like what they were. He showered just after 10. She heard the pipes in the wall, the familiar percussion of their house at night, and she sat on her side of the bed with her hands still in her lap. His laptop was on the desk by the window, where it always was. He had left it open, the screen dimmed to a low glow but not yet asleep. She told herself later that she had been looking for the shared folder with their tax documents. She had been meaning to check something. That was what she told herself. She sat down at the desk and touched the trackpad. The screen brightened. A file browser was already open, and there, in the middle of the screen, nested between a folder labeled R&D Contracts and one labeled Site Plans Moreau, was a folder named simply CA. She opened it. 12 documents. Bank statements with an account number she didn't recognize, wire transfer records, amounts that made her go still. An LLC registration for something called Ashworth Meridian Group, and a financial summary with Camille's name printed cleanly at the top, like a business plan, like a future being built. From the hallway, the shower shut off. Catherine's fingers moved. She closed the folder, closed the browser, stepped away from the desk, and was sitting on her side of the bed with her book open in her lap by the time the bathroom door opened. Her heart was hitting the inside of her chest so hard she was certain he would hear it. He didn't. She lay beside him in the dark for a long time. He fell asleep quickly, the way he always did, one arm tucked under the pillow, his breathing going slow and even within minutes. She listened to it, measured it, counted the seconds between each breath. She would not confront him. Not yet. Not until she knew every piece of it. Not until there was nowhere for any of it to go except the direction she pointed it. She stared at the ceiling. She lay very still, and she began to think. She got to the bank at 6:53 the next morning. The floor was empty at that hour, just the low hum of the HVAC system and the pale blue glow of the security lights above the elevator bank. Catherine liked it this way, the quiet before everyone arrived, the building thinking. She sat down at her desk, opened her computer, and stared at the screen for a long moment without typing anything. She had written down the account numbers on the back of a grocery receipt before she left the house, the LLC name, the wire amounts. Her handwriting was small and precise, the numbers spaced evenly, the way she wrote everything. She had folded the receipt and put it in the inside pocket of her coat, and she had worn the coat the whole drive in, even though it wasn't cold. She needed to talk to Tobias. Tobias Reyes sat in the risk division, 2 rows over from the audit team, in the corner office that wasn't really an office, just a glass-walled cube that gave him slightly more wall space for his whiteboards. Those boards were always covered. Timelines, account maps, arrows connecting amounts to entities to names. He moved through financial records the way other people moved through rooms they grew up in, easily, without having to think about where anything was. Catherine had worked alongside him for 4 years. He was careful with language, specific with what he said and didn't say. He never talked down to her. That mattered, though she had never said it out loud. She found him at his desk just after 7, a coffee at his elbow, already reading. "Reyes," she said. He looked up. Whitfield? He clocked something in her face, not enough to name it, but enough to set down what he was reading. You're here early. I need a favor, she said. She kept her voice even. I've got a suspicious account pattern I'd like a second set of eyes on, informally, before I decide if it's worth escalating. It was almost the truth. What kind of pattern? She handed him the receipt. He looked at it, then looked at her. LLC, he said. Ashworth Meridian Group, she said. I can't find it in any of the institutional databases. The transfers are moving in a single direction, regular intervals, and the receiving account looks personal rather than commercial. Tobias turned the receipt over in his hand. His expression didn't change exactly. It sharpened slightly, the way it did when something interesting landed on his desk. Give me a few days, he said. 4 days passed. Catherine went home each evening and cooked dinner and asked Reginald about his day and listened to his answers and said very little. He seemed lighter somehow these last few days. Easier. He laughed at things on television. He touched her shoulder in passing. She accepted every gesture with a small, neutral smile, and when he wasn't looking, she felt the shape of it from the outside, the way a person feels a wall in the dark, methodically, with both palms flat. On the 5th morning, Tobias appeared at her desk at 8:15 with a plain manila folder under his arm and a look on his face she recognized. She had worn that same look herself more than once. The look of someone who pulled on a thread and found a whole second garment behind it. He sat down across from her and opened the folder. Okay, he said, keeping his voice low. The LLC was registered 14 months ago in Delaware. No physical address, single registered agent, a law firm that handles shell incorporations for a living. The company is called a holding entity in the paperwork, but it's not holding anything. It's a pass-through. He laid a page in front of her, a clean diagram, boxes and arrows, the kind he drew on his whiteboards, but printed small and formal. Money goes in here, he said, pointing to the first box. It was labeled WDG Partners, the name of Reginald's development company. Then it moves here. His finger moved to a second box, Ashworth Meridian Group. Then from there, it branches. He pointed to a third box at the bottom, a boutique firm, newly registered, Meridian House Studio. Catherine looked at the name. That's a real company, she said. It is now, Tobias said. 6 months old, registered in the same woman's name. Interior design and brand consulting. A website, a studio address, 2 listed employees. He paused. It looks legitimate because the money flowing into it is real, but the money is coming from a development company that has a very different set of investors and obligations attached to it. Catherine kept her eyes on the diagram. She kept her hands flat on the desk. Reginald wasn't just having an affair. He was building something. Quietly, carefully, one transfer at a time. Diverting money from the company he ran, money that belonged, at least in part, to investors and obligations and a decade of shared financial life, and using it to lay the foundation of a different future, one that had no room for her in it. He had been building an exit. Tobias slid the folder across the desk. Catherine, he said, and the use of her first name was quiet and deliberate. This goes a lot deeper than a suspicious account. She picked up the folder and held it in both hands. I know, she said. She took it home that evening and locked it in the steel box at the back of her closet, and then she sat on the floor in front of the closet for a long time, and she kept digging. She pulled the joint home file from the steel box at 11 that night. It was a thick accordion folder, the kind with the elastic band across the front. Reginald had always called her the keeper of the paperwork. He said it like a compliment. She understood now that it wasn't. She spread everything across the kitchen table. Mortgage statements, the original deed, the refinancing documents from 3 years ago, the homeowner's insurance binders, the property tax records, the closing costs summary from the day they bought the house. 10 years of paper, organized by date in color-coded tabs, because she was the kind of person who did that. She placed the shell company folder beside it and started working. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the wet street and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling, and then it was dark again. She found it on the third pass. It was tucked between a routine escrow statement and an HOA notice from 17 months ago, a deed of trust amendment. 2 pages, dense with legal language, referencing a second lien instrument against the property. She had never seen it before. She had never signed anything like it. Her eyes moved to the signature line at the bottom of the second page, Catherine M. Whitfield. Her name, in her handwriting, except it wasn't. The loop on the K was wrong. The H dipped where hers never did. She had signed her name thousands of times. She knew every muscle movement in it, the small automatic pull at the end of the D. This signature had been copied by someone who studied the original, but didn't live inside it. She picked up the page and held it under the kitchen light. The notary stamp was real. The date was 9 months ago. The lien amount was $240,000, borrowed against the equity in their home. She set the page down carefully. She crossed it against Tobias's folder. The timeline matched. 9 months ago was exactly when the first large transfer into Ashworth Meridian Group had occurred. The money had flowed from their house, her house, the house she had signed for honestly, the house she had paid half the mortgage on for a decade, directly into the shell company, and from there into Meridian House Studio, into Camille's business. Reginald had borrowed against their home without her knowledge. He had forged her name to do it. He had handed $240,000 to the woman he was building a future with. And then he had come home and touched her shoulder and laughed at the television and said nothing. Catherine placed the forged document on top of the mortgage folder. She did not throw anything. She did not cry. She sat with both hands flat on the table and breathed through her nose, slow and even, until her chest stopped feeling like it was being pressed from the inside. Then she picked up her phone and texted Diane. "I need to see you tomorrow. It's serious. Bring time." Diane Okafor's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Clement Street, clean and simply decorated. One framed print on the wall, a low shelf of law books, a desk that always had something on it but never looked messy. Diane herself was the same way, precise edges, easy warmth underneath. She had known Catherine since their freshman year of college, when they had been assigned to the same study room in the library and spent the entire session arguing about case theory for a class neither of them was taking. They had been close ever since. She read the documents without speaking, all of them. The mortgage amendment, the notary stamp, the shell company summary from Tobias, the wire records. She read with her reading glasses on and a yellow legal pad in front of her, and she made small notes while she read, quick and fluid, without looking up. When she finished, she took her glasses off. "The signature is forged," she said. "I know," Catherine said. "I mean legally," Diane said. "This isn't a gray area, Catherine. Forging a spouse's signature on a mortgage document and having it notarized is fraud. Bank fraud. It's a felony." She tapped the shell company summary. "And this, on top of it, the diversion of business funds through a fraudulent entity, that's a separate exposure entirely. His investors could bring civil claims. The state could bring criminal ones." Catherine looked at the table. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you have more leverage than you think," Diane said. Her voice was careful but not soft. "You came in here thinking you had proof of an affair. What you actually have is proof of financial fraud committed directly against you, in your own home, using your identity without your consent." She leaned forward slightly. "That changes the entire picture." She walked Catherine through it plainly. The forged signature was grounds for the mortgage to be voided. The shell company records created a traceable paper trail of business misconduct. Together, they opened the door to both criminal complaint and civil recovery. Any divorce proceeding would begin with Catherine holding the only clean hands in the room. He thought this would buy him a clean exit, Diane said. What it actually bought him was a case. Catherine looked at the forged page one more time. The wrong signature. The borrowed loop on the K. I need one more layer before I move, she said. Diane nodded. Then go get it. Catherine gathered the folder, capped her pen, and left the office. He made waffles on Saturday. That was the first sign. Reginald hadn't cooked breakfast on a weekend in over 2 years. But there he was at 8 in the morning, standing at the counter in his gray t-shirt, pouring batter into the waffle iron like it was something he did every day, humming something low and tuneless to himself. Morning, he said when Catherine walked in. He smiled over his shoulder, the full smile, the one that reached his eyes, the one she used to count on. Morning, she said. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him. He moved around the kitchen with a kind of easy confidence, pulling the orange juice from the fridge, setting out place without being asked, pouring her a glass before his own. Small gestures, deliberate, a performance, though he didn't know she was watching it as one. The waffles were good. She told him so. He looked pleased in the way a man looks pleased when something is going according to plan. After breakfast, he suggested a walk. They hadn't done that in a long time either. The neighborhood was quiet in the way Saturdays are, unhurried and slow-moving. A few kids on bikes, someone mowing a lawn 2 houses down. The trees along the street were still holding their color, dark gold and rust, and the air had that cold, clean edge that comes before the weather turns for good. Reginald walked close. His shoulder touched hers. He reached over, without ceremony, and took her hand. She let him. His thumb moved across her knuckles in small circles. It was an old habit, something he used to do in the early years, during movies or long car rides, the kind of absent affection that said, I know you're there. She had not felt it in a very long time. It felt like a lie now, a comfortable one, worn smooth. I've been thinking, he said. His voice was easy, conversational. About us, about where we are. What do you mean? She said. I mean, he paused, and she could hear him choosing the words. We've been so busy, both of us. I feel like we've been running parallel to each other instead of actually being together. He squeezed her hand. I don't want that anymore. Catherine kept her eyes on the sidewalk ahead. Neither do I, she said. It cost her nothing to say it because she meant something entirely different by it. They were back home by noon, sitting together on the living room couch with the television on low, the kind of afternoon that would have looked perfectly normal from the outside. Reginald had his arm around her. Catherine was leaning into it just enough. Her phone was on the cushion beside her, face down. The voice recorder app was open and running. She had turned it on in the hallway before she sat down. 43 seconds of her own footsteps, and then the sound of her settling onto the cushion, and then his voice. I want to talk about something, he said. Okay, she said. I've been thinking about starting a family. He said it quietly, like the words were fragile. I know we've talked around it before. I know I've been the one pumping the brakes, but I think we're ready. I think I'm ready. Catherine let a beat of silence pass. Then she turned to look at him. His expression was open, earnest even, and beneath it, just barely visible the way a crack shows under fresh paint, was something calculated. That means a lot to me, she said. Her voice was soft. She held his gaze. Why now? He let out a breath. Because I don't want us drifting. I want us building something, together. He shifted slightly, and his tone changed by just a fraction, the way it did when he moved from feeling to planning. And honestly, with everything we've been working on, things are going to stabilize soon. The development side, and protecting what we've built with Camille's firm. That all gets easier once… He stopped. Not a dramatic stop, just a small one. A half-second recalibration, the kind that happens when someone hears their own words a moment too late. Once the new quarter settles, he finished. Catherine blinked slowly, like she was taking in something hopeful. You really think things are about to turn around? Yeah, he said. He leaned back, the ease returning to his posture like water finding its level. Yeah, I do. She smiled at him, the smile she had been practicing for 2 weeks. warm and open and entirely composed, a reflection of a woman who believed her husband. She did not believe her husband. She had not believed him in a long time, but she had just heard him say Camille's name in her living room, in the context of their future, as if it were a natural part of the sentence, as if it belonged there, as if she were not supposed to notice. She noticed. 30 minutes later, she told him she was going to freshen up. The bathroom door clicked shut behind her. She turned on the faucet. She picked up her phone and pulled up the recording, pressed pause, listened to the last 40 seconds of it with the volume low against her ear. Protecting what we've built with Camille's firm. Clear, unmistakable, his voice. She saved the file, airdropped it to her personal tablet, already locked inside the steel box with everything else. Then she deleted it from the phone's recent files and tucked the phone into her pocket. Deborah Whitfield lived in a red brick colonial on the north side of town, the kind of house that had been staged for company since the day she moved in. Everything in it had a place. Everything in it meant something, or was supposed to. Framed family photos, evenly spaced, a bowl of fake fruit on the dining room table, polished to a shine, throw pillows that had never been thrown. Catherine had always felt like a guest here, even after 10 years. She called ahead that Sunday morning, keeping her voice light, said she wanted to talk about planning a holiday gathering. Nothing formal, just a conversation. Deborah said she'd put the kettle on. She sounded pleased in a way that had a small, careful smile behind it. Catherine noticed that too. The tea was Earl Grey, served in the good china. Deborah set out a plate of shortbread cookies that nobody was going to eat, and sat across from Catherine in the high-backed chair she always chose, the one that faced the door, the one that kept her looking like she was presiding over something. She was 71 years old and still dressed like she was going somewhere. A gray blouse with a pearl button at the collar, her hair set in the same silver wave she'd worn for 20 years. Posture like a woman who had decided long ago that slouching was a form of weakness. "You look thin," Deborah said, stirring her tea. "You've been overdoing it at that bank again." "I'm fine," Catherine said. She smiled. "Just busy." Deborah set down her spoon. "Reginald says you've been a little distant lately." He said that. Catherine held the smile. "He worries about me. It's sweet." "He loves you," Deborah said. The way she said it had a shape to it, like a statement that was also a ceiling. "He loves you, and that is enough, and you should leave the rest alone." Catherine wrapped both hands around her teacup, warm, steady. "I know he does." They talked about the gathering for a while, who would come, which weekend worked, whether Deborah's dining room or Catherine's house. Deborah preferred her own dining room, naturally. She always did. Catherine let her talk, let her plan, let her believe the conversation was going exactly the way she intended it to. And then Deborah said, "It'll be good for the family to come together, especially now, with everything." Catherine looked up, just mildly curious. "What do you mean?" Deborah paused. The smallest hesitation, the kind that means someone is deciding how much to say. Then she smoothed the front of her blouse and said, "Reginald's been under a lot of pressure. The business has been difficult. I've tried to help where I can." "That's kind of you," Catherine said. "Family supports family." Deborah picked up her teacup. "I gave him some money a while back to help stabilize things. It was a loan, technically." She said technically like it was a small and unimportant word. Just enough to keep things moving forward while he worked out the details. "That was generous," Catherine said. "When was that?" "Oh, a few months ago, maybe 6. A pause. "You know how these things go. Cash flow issues. The new venture needed a push." "The new venture?" Catherine kept her eyes soft, kept her breathing slow. "Which venture was that?" Deborah's gaze drifted to her teacup for just a moment, less than a second, then back up. "The young woman he's been mentoring," she said. "Camille. Very sharp girl. Ambitious." Another pause, this one deliberate, placed like a piece of furniture in the middle of the room. "Reginald has always had good instincts about people." She said it without breaking eye contact. And in that moment, Catherine understood everything, Not just what Deborah was saying, but what she wasn't saying. She had known. She had known about Camille, about the money, possibly about all of it, and she had decided that the right thing to do, the family thing to do, was to help it along quietly. Because in Deborah's calculation, Catherine was always going to be the one who didn't fit the image she'd built in her head for her son's life. I gave him some money. The young woman he's been mentoring. Family supports family. Well, Catherine said. She set down her cup. Her hand was perfectly steady. It's wonderful that you were able to be there for him. Deborah looked at her for a moment, a probing look, the kind that was checking for damage, and then relaxed. He needed someone in his corner. Of course, Catherine said. She stayed for another 20 minutes. She finished her tea. She complimented the shortbread she didn't touch. She hugged Deborah at the door and said the gathering sounded lovely and that she'd send details soon. She drove 3 blocks before she had to pull over. She sat in the parked car with both hands on the wheel, staring at the windshield, and let the fury move through her like a current. She did not cry. She breathed, in through her nose, out through her mouth, 4 counts each, until the shaking stopped. Then she put the car in drive and went home. The steel box was on the kitchen table by 9 o'clock that night. She spread everything out under the overhead light. The shell company records Tobias had printed, the forged mortgage with her copied signature, the recording saved to her tablet, and the notes she had written in her own hand after leaving Deborah's house while every word was still fresh. She organized it in order, not by date, by weight. The forgery first, because that was the crime with her name on it, literally. Then the shell company records, because that was the money, and the money was the plan. Then the recording, because that was his voice, admitting the plan existed. Then Deborah's role, because that completed it. That showed it wasn't one man's selfishness, but a family decision, a quiet vote taken without her, to discard her and call it support. She put each document in a labeled folder. She photographed every page and uploaded the images to an encrypted folder on a drive she kept separate from everything else. She wrote a 1-page summary, short sentences, clean facts, no emotion, the way she would write it for a fraud case at work. Because that is what it was. That was exactly what it was. When she was finished, she sat back in her chair. The table looked like a case file, because it was. She picked up her phone, opened her messages, typed to Reginald first. I'd like us to have a proper family dinner at the house next Saturday. You, me, and your mother. I think it's time we talked about the future of the marriage. I'll make dinner, 7 p.m. She sent it. Then she opened a new message to Deborah and typed the same thing word for word. She set the phone face up on the table and waited. The table was set by 6. Catherine had ironed the white linen cloth herself that morning. She used the good plates, the wedding set, Deborah's choice, bone white with a thin gold rim. She lit 2 candles in the center. She made roast chicken, roasted potatoes, a green salad with the dressing Reginald had always said he liked. Everything looked warm. Everything looked like an effort made for people who deserved it. She moved through the kitchen without hurrying. She had been calm all day, in the way that a room is calm before the windows come open, still but not empty. At 5 minutes to 7, she heard tires on the driveway. They came in together, which she had expected. Reginald held the door for his mother. He was wearing the navy blazer he saved for dinners that needed to go well, the one with the silver buttons that he thought made him look established. He had shaved close. His smile arrived before the rest of him. "Something smells incredible," he said. Deborah stepped in behind him, carrying a bottle of wine. She had dressed up. Of course she had. A cream blouse, dark slacks, her good earrings. She looked like she was arriving at a negotiation she had already won. "Catherine?" Deborah touched both her shoulders in the way that was almost a hug. "The house looks lovely." "Thank you," Catherine said. "Come in, sit down." She took their coats. She poured water. She carried the food to the table herself, one dish at a time, and they sat in their usual places without being told. Reginald at the head, Deborah at his right, Catherine across from her. The way it had always been. The way it was allowed to be, one last time. They ate for 20 minutes. Reginald relaxed into it. She could see it happening. His shoulders dropping, his voice getting easier, the story he was telling about a contractor he'd fired becoming more animated as he decided the night was going his way. Deborah poured herself a second glass of wine and commented on the chicken and asked whether Catherine had used tarragon. "A little," Catherine said. "Reginald loves tarragon," Deborah said, as if Catherine hadn't been cooking for Reginald for 10 years. "I know," Catherine said. She waited until the plates were mostly cleared. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen counter, and came back with a manila folder. Then another. Then a third. She set one in front of Reginald, one in front of Deborah, and kept the third in her hands. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table. Nobody spoke. "I'd like to go through some documents," Catherine said. Her voice was the same voice she used at work. Level, precise. "I'll keep it organized so it's easy to follow." Reginald looked at the folder the way a man looks at something he doesn't want to touch. "Catherine, what is this?" "Open it," she said. He did, slowly. The forged mortgage was on top. 2 pages, printed clean. Her signature, or the version of it that wasn't hers, visible on the second page, line 3. "That's the second mortgage taken out against this house," Catherine said. "Filed 7 months ago. I didn't sign it." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I've had 3 handwriting analysts confirm the signature isn't mine. Diane Okafor has 2 of those reports. The bank's fraud department has the 3rd. Reginald's jaw moved. No words came out. "Behind that," Catherine said, "you'll find the shell company records. Meridian Property Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware, created 18 months ago, capitalized through transfers routed from Whitfield Development. Behind that is a summary of the transfers to Camille Ashworth's boutique firm." She paused. "Your firm, really, since you've been funding it." The color had started leaving his face. The navy blazer wasn't doing the work he'd brought it here to do. "Reg," Deborah began. "I'll get to you," Catherine said, quietly. No anger in it at all, just information, delivered in sequence. She turned to face Deborah directly. "Your folder has the same mortgage and company records," she said, "but it also has a separate page at the back. Those are the cash transfers from your personal account to Reginald over the last 8 months. 6 transfers, disguised as loans." She watched Deborah's hand tighten around her wine glass. "The amounts match the capitalization schedule for Camille's firm almost exactly. I've noted the dates." "Those were private family," Deborah started. "They're documented transfers," Catherine said. "Diane has seen them. The bank's legal team has flagged the pattern." She let that land. "You called it family support. The paperwork calls it something else." Reginald had stopped looking at the folder. He was looking at Catherine now. Really looking at her, maybe for the first time in years, with an expression she had never seen on him before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't guilt. It was the look of a man who had just realized, fully and finally, that he had badly miscalculated the person sitting across from him. "Copies of everything are already with Diane," Catherine said. "The fraud complaint was filed Thursday morning." She picked up her water glass and took a slow sip. The candles between them burned straight and still. Reginald pushed back his chair first. He stood up without a word, his folder left open on the table. He picked up his keys from the counter, she hadn't even seen him set them there, and walked to the door. Deborah followed. Her wine glass was still half full. She left it. Neither of them looked back. Catherine stayed in her chair and listened to the front door close, to the sound of the car starting, to the crunch of tires reversing down the driveway until there was nothing left to hear. The candles burned on. The fraud complaint hit the system on a Thursday. Diane filed it herself, 9:15 in the morning, with everything attached. The forged signature reports, the shell company records, the transfer documentation, the recording transcript. She called Catherine afterward to confirm it had gone through. "It's moving," Diane said. "Good," Catherine said. That was the whole conversation. The bank's fraud department moved faster than Catherine expected. Within 48 hours, a compliance officer had flagged Meridian Property Solutions LLC to two of Reginald's primary business partners, men who had invested significant money into Whitfield development based on projections that now, under scrutiny, didn't hold up. One of them, a developer named Hargrove who had backed three of Reginald's projects, requested an independent audit before the week was out. What the audit found wasn't a surprise to Catherine. It was a surprise to everyone else. The money Reginald had been moving through Meridian wasn't just Camille's startup funding. It was capital that should have been sitting in the development company's operating accounts, investor money, loan draws, construction reserves. He had been running the whole thing on a tilt for almost 2 years, pulling from one side to prop up the other, betting that the new venture would generate enough return to cover the gaps before anyone noticed. Nobody had noticed, until now. Hargrove pulled out first. His attorney sent a formal withdrawal letter on a Friday afternoon. By the following Monday, 2 other partners had followed. The project stalled. The contractors stopped showing up. The phones at Whitfield Development went to voicemail and then, after a few more days, just stopped being answered at all. Catherine heard about it through Tobias, who kept an eye on the public filings with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. "The LLC is frozen," he told her one morning, sliding a printed page across her desk. "Bank put a hold on the accounts pending investigation. His development company filed a voluntary suspension of operations yesterday." She looked at the page. She read it carefully, the way she read everything. "Thank you, Tobias," she said. He nodded and went back to his desk. Camille disappeared from Reginald's life in the way that people do when the money stops, quickly and without much ceremony. Catherine only knew the details secondhand, through Diane, who had a contact in the small firm legal world where Camille's boutique operation had been trying to establish itself. The story, as it came back to Catherine, was simple. Camille had called Reginald the same week Hargrove's letter went out, the same week the audit findings started spreading through their shared professional circles. The call was short, the decision was final. Reginald had nothing left to offer, and Camille, whatever else she was not a woman who stayed where there was nothing to gain. But the exit didn't clean her name. Meridian Property Solutions LLC was on paper. Her boutique firm's connection to a fraudulent shell company was a matter of record now, accessible to anyone who looked, and people in their industry looked. 2 potential clients she'd been courting quietly withdrew. A co-working space she'd been trying to sublease from a property group suddenly became unavailable. Her name started appearing alongside Reginald's in the kind of industry conversations that nobody wrote down, but everybody remembered. She had helped build the disguise. Now she was wearing part of it. Deborah's reckoning came more slowly, and it hurt differently. The bank's legal team sent a formal letter of inquiry to her home address in the 3rd week. Careful, professional language about the nature of certain transfers and her potential exposure to liability as a knowing party to a fraudulent financial arrangement. It was not an accusation. It was the kind of letter that made clear an accusation was possible. Catherine didn't send that letter. She hadn't needed to. The transfers were on record. The pattern was obvious. The legal team had found it themselves. What Catherine couldn't have engineered, and didn't need to, was the family. Word moved through Reginald's relatives the way it always did, through phone calls and Sunday dinners, and someone saying something they weren't supposed to say to someone who told 2 other people before noon. The version that spread was accurate enough. Reginald had forged his wife's name on their house. His mother had known about it and helped fund it. Catherine had been deceived for years. The family chose sides without being asked. An aunt who had always sent Catherine birthday cards, but never quite warmed to her, Catherine had always sensed, called personally to say she was sorry. 2 cousins stopped returning Deborah's texts. The family gathering Deborah had hosted every November, the one she planned and organized and presided over like a small ceremony of her own importance, was handed off to someone else without explanation. Deborah was not removed from anything officially. She simply found herself standing outside of things that used to include her. On a quiet Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the dinner, Catherine sat at her kitchen table with the preliminary settlement documents Diane had sent over. She read every page. She made notes in the margins in her small, even handwriting. The house was hers. The joint accounts were frozen pending final division. Reginald's attorney had already indicated his client would not be contesting the asset claims, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances. She set her pen down and looked out the kitchen window. The yard was dark. The neighbor's porch light was on, throwing a pale square across the grass. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking once, then going quiet. Reginald's development company was gone. His partners had scattered. His name was attached to a fraud investigation that would follow him through every professional introduction he tried to make for years. Camille was gone. Deborah was alone in a house full of the family standing she had traded Catherine's dignity to protect, and that standing was gone too. All of it built on the assumption that Catherine would not look closely, that she would not act, that she was the kind of person who could be moved around quietly, like furniture, and would stay wherever she was put. She picked up her pen and went back to reading. Reginald arrived at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Catherine heard his car in the driveway, a rental, Diane had mentioned, because the lease on his own had lapsed, and she stayed at the kitchen table until she heard the knock. She didn't rush to the door. She finished writing the note she was making on the last page of the settlement packet, capped her pen, and then went to answer it. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. He was the same height, the same broad shoulders, the same jaw she had once found reassuring. But something behind his eyes had gone flat, the way a room looks after the furniture has been removed. He was wearing a jacket she recognized, a dark wool one he'd always kept pressed and ready, and she understood he had worn it on purpose, a last attempt at looking like himself. "Catherine?" His voice was careful. "Come in," she said. She did not hug him. She stepped back from the door and let him enter, and he followed her to the kitchen table where the documents were already laid out, organized, each section tabbed and ready for signature. He sat down across from her. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. "I want to say something before we do this," he started. "You can say it," she said, "but it won't change anything on this table." He nodded slowly, like he understood that, like he had maybe even expected it. "I know I hurt you." "You forged my name on our house," she said. Her voice was even, no heat in it, just the fact, stated plainly, the way she would read a figure from a report. "You moved money out of your company, investor money, money that other people trusted you with, and you routed it to a woman you were planning to leave me for. You let your mother help you do it. You let all of it happen while I was sitting at this table, in this house, making myself smaller so you could feel bigger." She paused. "That's not hurt. That's a decade of choices." Reginald opened his mouth. She kept going, not louder, quieter if anything. "What you lost wasn't a wife who didn't see it coming. What you lost was someone who was actually on your side. I was on your side." She said it without grief, without accusation, just as a true thing that deserved to be said out loud. "You didn't lose me because the marriage got hard. You lost me because you decided I was something you could use. And the miscalculation, the one that cost you everything, was believing I was too quiet to notice." The kitchen was still. Reginald looked at the table. He didn't argue. She didn't expect him to. There was nothing left to argue with. The documents were real. The records were real. The fraud complaint was real. Even the jacket he'd worn to look like himself was borrowed from a life that no longer existed. He signed where the tabs indicated. All of it. Every page. When he was done, he stood up and she walked him to the door without ceremony, the way she would walk out a meeting that had concluded. He paused on the front step, half-turned, and she could see him searching for something final to say. She didn't give him the space to find it. "Take care of yourself, Reginald," she said, and closed the door. 6 months passed. The promotion came through in November. The same week, Catherine had her kitchen gutted down to the studs. Senior Compliance Director. The title she had quietly removed from her own ambitions years ago, filed away in the part of herself she had trained to stay small. Her manager had called her into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, and she had sat across from him and accepted the role the way she accepted most things now, directly, without apology for wanting it. The house was loud for weeks. Contractors came early and stayed late. Walls were opened, fixtures were pulled. She made decisions about tile and paint and cabinet hardware with the same careful attention she brought to everything, and she made them alone, without deferring to anyone. Tobias stopped by one afternoon to return a book she'd lent him, stood in the middle of the half-finished kitchen, and looked around at the exposed framing and the plastic sheeting and the new window she'd had widened to let in more light. "You did all this?" he asked. "I'm doing all this," she said. He smiled. It was an easy smile, the kind that didn't ask for anything. She made coffee in the small pot she'd set up on a folding table in the corner, and they stood in the gutted kitchen, talking about nothing important. A case at work, a restaurant he'd tried, the way the new window changed the whole feel of the room. And it was comfortable in the way that only honest things are comfortable. He left after an hour. She didn't watch his car pull away. That evening, after the contractors had gone and the house was quiet again, Catherine stood alone in the kitchen. The last of the light came through the new window, wider than the old one, letting in more of the sky. The counters were bare, the walls were fresh. Everything was hers. She stood in the middle of it, both feet flat on the floor, shoulders back, and she took up exactly as much space as she needed. No more, no less. Just exactly enough. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!